David says the Quran brands Jews as the greatest enemies of Muslims. That Islam started off with love for Jews and Christians, but when they rejected Muhammad, peace be upon him, he turned on them. That the Quran's message just flips depending on Muhammad's mood. But here's the problem. These critics are relying on cut-paste theology, completely ignoring context, classical tafsir, and the historical timeline of revelation. Let's unpack Surah 582 and expose how David Wood manipulates verses, ignores actual history, and once again fails to read the Quran as it was meant to be understood.
Surah 5, verse 82. Verily, you will find the strongest among men in enmity to the believers, i.e. Muslims, the Jews, and those who are al-Mushrikoon. Mushrikoon are people who associate partners with Allah. And you will find the nearest in love to the believers, i.e. Muslims, those who say, we are Christians. That is because amongst them are priests and monks, and they are not proud. So, the greatest enemies of Muslims, according to Surah 5, verse 82 of the Quran, are Jews and those who associate partners with Allah. And the closest in love to Muslims are Christians. Oddly enough, Jews and Christians are different groups from the mushriks here. Jews and Christians don't associate partners with Allah. Later in the Quran, when Allah has to justify violently subjugating Jews and Christians, he declares that Jews and Christians are, in fact, mushriks. It's interesting how Allah's eternal word, the Quran, changed depending on how Muhammad was feeling. When Muhammad began receiving revelations in Mecca, the message of the Quran was, it's Muslims, Jews, and Christians united as monotheists against the polytheists. Later, Muhammad and his followers moved to Medina, and it was a very important test for Muhammad because he had just spent a decade telling his followers that the Jews would accept him as a prophet. Muhammad had assured his followers that there were prophecies about him in the Torah, book of Trust Me Bro, chapter Just Take My Word for It. But now that the Muslim community had moved to Medina, where there were 3 tribes of Jews, Muslims finally had an opportunity to see if Muhammad was right. In a shocking blow to Muhammad's ego, the Jews rejected him as a prophet and mocked him for his ignorance. That's when the message of the Quran changed to Muslims and Christians are united against pagans and Jews, as we read in Surah 5, verse 82. Eventually, Christians also rejected him as a prophet, so the message of Islam became, it's Muslims against everyone.
Let's read the full verse as it is. You will surely find the most intense of the people in animosity toward the believers to be the Jews and those who associate others with Allah, and you will find the nearest of them in affection to the believers those who say, we are Christians. That is because among them are priests and monks, and because they are not arrogant. Surah Al-Ma'idah. Now let's break it down, word by word and line by line. First, this verse is not declaring all Jews to be the greatest enemies. It's a description of a historical reality observed at the time of revelation, not an eternal commandment. Ibn Kathir, one of the most respected classical scholars, explains that this verse was revealed after several Jewish tribes in Medina repeatedly broke treaties and betrayed Muslims during critical battles. These include Banu Kainuka broke the treaty and mocked Muslims after Badr. Banu Nadir plotted to assassinate the Prophet. Banu Qurayza sided with Quraysh during the Battle of the Trench. These acts weren't minor disagreements, they were betrayals in the middle of wartime. So the verse is commenting on how the Jews in Medina, not all Jews in the world, were showing active hostility. Now compare that to Christians at the time. When a group of Muslims fled persecution in Mecca, where did the Prophet, peace be upon him, send them? To a Christian land, Abyssinia, and the Christian king Najashi gave them full protection. When Christian priests came to visit the Prophet in Medina, he welcomed them into his mosque, allowed them to worship in their own way, and engaged in respectful dialogue. The Quran says they are close in love because they are humble and seek truth, not because of their label. This verse doesn't say all Jews are evil and all Christians are good. It says, Based on how different groups responded to the message, this is what the Prophet and Muslims experienced. David Wood tries to say, see, the Quran says Christians are beloved, then later calls them Mushrikoon. That's a contradiction. False. The Quran does not contradict itself. It distinguishes between 1. Sincere Jews and Christians who followed God's message and were humble. 2. And those who rejected truth knowingly, changed their scriptures, and committed injustice. Let's look at the proof. In Surah 3:1-13, the Quran says, they are not all the same. Among the people of the book is a community standing in obedience, reciting the verses of Allah during periods of the night and prostrating in prayer. The Quran makes a clear distinction. Not all Jews and Christians are the same. The criticism applies only to those who oppose truth knowingly, not to those who are sincere. As for being mushrikun, the Quran accuses some Christians of shirk only when they claim that Jesus is God or part of a trinity. Surah 5:72 says, they have certainly disbelieved who say, Allah is the Messiah, the son of Mary. This is theological critique, not personal hatred. It doesn't erase the respect Islam gives to those who live humbly and seek truth. So again, David's logic falls apart because he flattens the Quran's nuanced approach into a false contradiction. Now let's tackle the claim that Muhammad got rejected, so he got angry and turned against Jews and Christians. Let's be real. The Prophet, peace be upon him, never punished people for mere rejection of his message. Even Quraysh leaders who mocked him in Mecca, Abu Lahab, Abu Jahl, were never harmed by him unless they physically attacked Muslims. The Jewish tribes in Medina didn't just reject Islam. They mocked the Prophet in public, colluded with enemies during war, broke the constitution of Medina, plotted assassinations. This wasn't theological disagreement, it was betrayal and treason. As for Christians, the Prophet continued to respect sincere Christians his entire life. He wrote letters to Christian rulers with dignity. He protected churches under Muslim rule. He said, whoever harms a Christian dhimmi, I will be his opponent on the day of judgment. That's not the behavior of someone who's bitter from rejection. That's leadership based on principle, not emotion. Surah 5:82 teaches a timeless lesson. People who are humble, sincere, and dedicated to truth, no matter their label, will be closest in love to believers. And people who mock, betray, and corrupt the message, no matter their identity, will show enmity. Islam doesn't judge by labels, it judges by truth and action. Critics like David Wood desperately want the Quran to look hateful, but the Quran speaks with clarity, balance, and justice. So next time someone throws Surah 5:82 at you, ask them, are you reading the whole context? Do you know why it was revealed? Are you pretending there are no sincere Jews or Christians in Islam? Because the Quran never said all Jews are enemies or all Christians are allies. It said this is what was observed based on their behavior. And that is a message of justice, not contradiction. If this response helped you see the truth behind the distortion, hit like, share it with someone who's been misled, and comment below which claim we should expose next. Assalamu alaikum.